Hello there. My name is Monica Burns, and welcome to Technology Essentials in Education. Today's episode is titled What's Working, What's Not, and Where AI is Heading with Heather Turbeville. And I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation. We're pulling back the curtain on the current state of classroom technology. And Heather is from Jotform. She shares all of the survey results from Jotform's 2026 EdTech Trends data that they've collected. And we talk about why the novelty era of AI is over and the integration era has begun. So, Heather and I talk about specific ways educators are leveraging AI to reclaim their time and the dangers of having too many fragmented tools. And we go into what her research shares about what teachers really want from their digital platforms. Let's get into the conversation. This episode is brought to you by Jotform. Jotform provides an all in one solution to streamline administrative tasks, enhance community engagement, and foster innovation. Using their no code drag and drop forms and workflows, your teams can securely collect and store data, automate tasks, and collaborate on team resources. Educational institutions are also eligible for a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Welcome to the podcast, Heather. I am so excited to chat with you today about EdTech trends for this year, what's working, what's not working, where AI is headed. But before we get into all of that, can you share with listeners a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Well, my day to day is never the same every day, but in terms of education, I work at Jotform, which creates software that anyone in any industry can use, but one of our largest user bases is education. So the goal is to create digital tools that help educators.
And I know I'm a Jotform user, super fan of all things Jotform, and
Awesome.
I'm just pumped to chat with you today and kind of hear about, things that you're seeing, what you're hearing from others, right, who you're talking to about this. And, Jotform recently published a survey on EdTech trends. And I'm curious as to what prompted this research and maybe what stood out to you immediately as you started reviewing the responses.
Right. Well, we wanted to get to know our audience a little bit better. So we asked some questions that we were curious about, like what are educators' pain points with
Mhm.
EdTech? What did they think of their tech tools? Are they using AI?
Yeah.
And we were surprised that the respondents liked their tech tools as much as they did.
Mhm.
77% said that their tools work well or very well. And
Mhm.
another thing that stood out to me was AI. They are 65% are already using AI and often in multiple ways.
That's wild, right? You sometimes, especially from the ed tech side of things, we're always a little concerned that someone might have, an experience where they feel that tool overwhelm or that they don't think things are working with them. So, especially having surveyed, your user base, right, to get those
Hmm.
great numbers and just the AI of it all. Like, I sometimes, think about what I'm seeing in my conversations. A lot of times I come into a school or district or work with them virtually, and I'm there to talk about, ed tech or AI uses for instructional planning. So, my kind of observational data might be a little skewed because, those are folks who are like ready to jump into the conversation are already showing some of that curiosity. So that's great that you are able to get kind of a larger sample size,
Hmm.
right? That, is probably coming with a bunch of different perspectives. And, from a content and research perspective, why does it feel important to center educator voices in conversations, particularly around AI right now?
Well, educators have unique challenges related to AI. Like, how do they teach students to use it without actually taking away the experience of a student learning. How do they make sure students learn to think critically while using AI? And how do they make sure students aren't using it to cheat? And I think all of those factors make this an area that's rich for research.
Yeah. You know, those are concerns I hear, right, in conversations with educators this week, kind of in the midst of a multi-part series I'm doing with a group of New York educators. And that's been one of the things that's front of mind, right, is how do we bring this to students, maybe without really bringing it to them? Or are we ready to have these conversations where kids are pressing all the buttons in these AI tools? Or are we simply modeling or sharing with them, some guidelines? So it's definitely an important time to hear these educator voices, right? Gathering that information and really listening to what those pain points, like you mentioned earlier, are around these topics that are not just an in and out trend, but are really right being adopted so widely in schools and districts and classroom teachers, right? Exploring
Mhm.
these tools with or without their students. And, the report shows that most educators feel their digital tools work well overall. Like you mentioned, that really great high number. What do you think is working better now than even a few years ago?
I think in general, these tools have gotten easier to use,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean there isn't still room for improvement. When we asked our survey respondents if they had any trouble with their tools, the biggest one they said was that they wanted their tools to work better with each other.
Hmm.
Other things they mentioned were more automation and AI functionality and better usability, and particularly the ability to access tools off-site, which
Hmm.
makes a lot of sense given how much work everyone does on their mobile devices now.
Yeah, and it's something I know students, right, say a lot, right? They're working in Google Docs on a phone, right? When we just assume,
Mhm.
right, it would be a computer interface. So, that's interesting to hear about what they want tools to do or to feel like as for individual experiences, but then also that talking amongst different tools. I hear, from
Yeah.
educators too about just the friction, which it kind of sounds like is
Hmm.
coming through in the survey, that it's hard to jump from one place to another, or maybe the sign-ons that they use, are not compatible across a lot of different platforms, and that mobile user interface is something too, right? That teachers who might bop around between different devices. I don't know about you, but I've got, I guess, three where I'm sitting right now
Hmm.
within view, and probably like a fourth, on the other side of the room, right? So if you're moving between different devices, you want everything to talk to each other, for
Right.
the same tool, right? Let alone all the different tools. And I'm curious about, the AI connection here too, because a majority of respondents already use AI. And I think it'll be important to mention here too that for folks who are curious about this data, right, they can, and we'll have plenty of links for them to go out, and
Yeah.
explore this too, so they can see some of this. But, a majority of respondents already use AI, often for productivity tasks. That's a big part of when I'm talking to teachers about AI, right, we kind of start with that productivity component. What does that tell us about how educators are approaching AI?
I think they're being really pragmatic. It's here,
Hmm.
it's available to them, so they're trying to use it to figure out how they can do their work better, more easily, with less effort.
Yeah, especially for someone who has a long to-do list, a lot of things they're trying to tackle, right? From a productivity standpoint, I know I sometimes share with teachers just like a silly, but maybe big in terms of a amount of time example of, you've got a list of vocabulary words, you want to put them in alphabetical order. You want to add an emoji, right, alongside each one so
Hmm.
kids have a visual cue. It sounds a little silly, but if you can snag, 5 minutes, 15 minutes from your day on an emoji keyboard tool, right? Like
Right.
that adds up over the course of the week. So I definitely see that, observationally or conversationally, right? When talking to teachers too, that productivity task is often, where they stay, where they start, and, maybe for a little bit, and then they kind of keep going. So when you think about the AI and the productivity piece, the findings suggest educators are generally open to AI, but with clear concerns around ethics,
Mhm.
accuracy, data security. How do you interpret that balance of optimism and caution?
I feel like I'm gonna say some of the same stuff I've mentioned before, but I think they're being realistic.
Hmm.
Generative AI is so ubiquitous, you can't ignore it. And
Hmm.
according to our survey, most of these teachers have found it useful themselves. But as we've seen, LLMs hallucinate, so you
Hmm.
can't just trust what they produce. Also, students can use it to cheat, so that needs to be addressed. And data security is a concern for anybody who does anything online,
Yeah.
especially for minors. Plus,
Hmm.
everyone in the US in education, has to abide by FERPA.
A quick note from the presenter of today's episode, Jotform. Jotform lets you build a form in minutes. Student survey forms, homework submission forms, online quizzes, and so much more. You can start from scratch, or if you want to get a head start, check out their collection of free form templates designed with teachers, schools, and districts in mind. Learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. Right. So, I mean, those are all things, right, that, educators, right, anyone who's consuming, right, or should say interacting with generative AI content in particular, right, creating something is kind of holding on to all of these things, right, at the same time, right? What they feel comfortable doing, what they have permission to do, should they be in an
Hmm.
educational setting? You mentioned FERPA, right? Those are all things. I don't know if I want to say like to reckon with, right? But you
Right.
really do have to work that out, right? What you're
Hmm.
comfortable with, right? The same way when are using maybe a smart home device, right? You are having to make a decision on whether or not it's worth bringing that into, right, a space that you live in and how you're using it, right, or interacting with that. So we make these decisions consciously, right, and unconsciously maybe, right,
Hmm.
throughout the course of, our week. And that's so true of these AI tools too. So, I guess I'm not surprised to hear, right, that you found that a little bit, right, in the data, because I know I hear that just kind of casually with folks, as I'm sure
Hmm.
you do too.
Right.
So looking ahead, now that have gone through this survey, you've reviewed, right, the results and looking at, AI, right, evolving from this productivity helper to something more embedded, right, educational workflows, right? How do you see this evolving, over the next, say, year or two?
Hmm. Um, well, instead of just using it for things like lesson planning, I think, or just paperwork, I think teachers will probably work on integrating it more into the classroom.
Mhm.
One of the more interesting uses that surfaced in our survey was teachers using AI to review course materials to
Mhm.
ensure that they covered all the concepts and standards mandated by the district program university. And this sounds like one of those things that teachers have to do, but they'd really rather not.
Mhm.
Up until recently, there wasn't a really good way to offload that, though. So I can see uses like this becoming a part of regular educational workflows.
Yeah, it's also a thing that takes a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
A lot of brain capital too. So whether it's offloading a particular task or offloading a set of maybe, low lift tasks that sure you could
Hmm.
do, right? They don't take forever. Doesn't even take that much energy perhaps to do, that mental energy. But if you are doing a lot of those things, right, by the end of the day, right, your brain capital is, right, a lot lower. I'm sure you've had this experience. Just this week, I said, um, I can't do this now. Like, this is a tomorrow thing.
Right.
Like, I'm
Yeah.
at capacity. I could try to do it now, but it'll take me twice as long. I might as
hmm
well, like, wait till I'm recharged a bit to dive in. And so that's interesting that you were kind of seeing certain things in the survey, but then, right, this shift from maybe that productivity helper to something more embedded in that educational workflow kind of might be the next step for people.
hmm Yeah, I did also want to mention that this is more in terms of administration,
Mhm.
but I think the use of AI agents for customer service functions will become more widespread as well, like having an agent on an admissions webpage answering
Mhm.
questions 24/7.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because sometimes when we think about, right, educational workflows, we're thinking of like our own individual experience, not what it
hmm
looks like to support the community, right? And it may be,
Yeah.
right, that someone goes to an admissions website, someone simply is trying to find the calendar, like on a district
hmm
homepage, right? And if you have that agent, that chatbot built in, right, that's going to save a lot of that manpower, if you will, for making sure that person has the support that they need, at least at that first pass, right? They might need someone,
hmm
right? They might need to talk to someone,
Right.
right? But, if that's getting a quick 24/7 answer to a question, that's huge in terms of
hmm
supporting, the larger community. And it kind of gets to the next question I wanted to ask you. The report highlights interest in these AI features like automation, assistance, those smarter workflows. Which of these do you think will become expectations rather than the nice to have, which is the category we might be in right now?
Right. Honestly, all of them. I think that they're all related to the same thing, which is helping teachers get work done more quickly with less effort. And the what I think will be more important to teachers than the how.
Mhm. Yeah. And just making sure that they, right, understand what's out there, right, what's
hmm
available, right, what options they have, right. I think that idea of, all of these things becoming expectations, right, is going to definitely, be the direction that we're headed in, down the line. So for someone who, is reviewing this information, is taking a look at the report, they can dive into some of the more granular details. They might bring some of that data back to a district planning meeting when they start talking about allocating resources or, what general trends are, right? Lots of ways to use, rich research and survey data like what you all have created and now shared. For someone who hasn't opened it up yet, right, who hasn't, spent some time reviewing the data, if you had to summarize the report's message in just one sentence for educators, what would it be?
Educators don't need better digital tools. They need digital tools that work better with each other.
I love that. I love that. And I think that really does paint the picture, right, of what, someone might try to say that, right? Or like that's what they're
hmm
getting at. But I love that idea that educators don't need better digital tools. They need digital tools that work better with each other. I think that sums it
hmm
up perfectly. And that is that pain point that someone might be trying to tell you, right? If you're a coach
Yeah.
working with a teacher and they're frustrated or they're feeling overwhelmed, right? That may be, right, what that pain point is for them, and they might not articulate it like quite as clearly, right, in that moment of frustration. But I think that really
hmm
is, what teachers are sharing, right? Casually in conversations, and then of course more formally, right, in all the data that you've collected. So
hmm
Heather, this is super useful for lots of different stakeholders in education who are, curious about what educators in wider spaces outside of their community might be thinking, right? But then taking this back into the work that they do. So we'll make sure to put plenty of links in the show notes where people can learn more about this. But maybe for someone who's on the move right now, who's just listening in, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
So you can feel free to email me. My email address is heather@jotform.com. and we have lots of educational resources on our website. As you said, you're going to be including a lot of those in the show notes. Also, the report itself is free to download. You just have to fill out a brief form, and then it's yours.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that everyone listening is able to click, access that, right? Find the report and dive into all the information that you unpacked for us today. So thank you so much, Heather, for sharing all of this with listeners.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
It was so much fun chatting with Heather for today's episode. Let's finish up like we always do with some key points to help make this EdTech easy. Use AI first to save time on planning, paperwork, and routine productivity tasks. Choose tools that integrate well with each other to reduce friction and overwhelm. Set clear guidelines for ethical, secure, and accurate AI use in schools. Look beyond productivity and explore AI for workflow support and community facing tasks. Remember, you can find the show notes and the full list of resources wherever you are watching this video so you can stay connected with Heather and the team at Jotform. A big thank you to Jotform, the presenter of today's episode. To learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise, head to jotform.com/enterprise/education.